From TRICHOMES.com, I'm Jason Kitamura, and this is Tech in Cannabis. I talk with game changers in the tech community to gain valuable insights into the future of the fast-paced cannabis industry. Today, we are joined by Jeremy Diehl, CTO and co-founder of Green Mill Supercritical, a company that specializes in CO2 extraction machines. CO2 extraction methods have been around for a long time, but were never seen as viable as other solvents like ethanol. We talk about how CO2 is now positioned to be the most cost-effective and efficient way to extract from cannabis, along with how their proprietary RealTime Winterization process is drastically cutting extraction times and producing a better product. All right, and today we have Jeremy Diehl, CTO and co-founder of Green Mill Supercritical. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, certainly. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we're really excited to hear about your new CO2 extraction technology and things like that. But before we get into it, I just wanted to ask you, just personally, like, how did you get involved in extraction in cannabis?
Oh man, so it wasn't a career of passion from the beginning. It was more just kind of coincidental, or just a typical career trajectory. Got out of college, and my first job was working for a small company that manufactured chromatography equipment that utilized CO2 as a solvent rather than some, the typical organic solvents that, HPLC chromatography equipment uses. And so that's where I got my start. My first project was actually managing bulk supply of CO2 for a chromatography equipment lab at Merck in New Jersey. And from there, my entire career has been spent making equipment centered around CO2.
Oh, that's interesting. So instead of it being more extraction for cannabis related, you're an expert in CO2 extraction, and basically you found your way into the cannabis sector.
Exactly. Yeah. So I guess I could say there's a little bit more to the trajectory than that. That was just my beginning, I guess.
Yeah. Gotcha.
As I worked on the chromatography equipment, Waters purchased our company around 2009, and I continued working with Waters from there. Sometime around 2013, I believe, Waters actually, there's an individual, John McKay, that was working at Waters as well, pushed Waters to get into the cannabis extraction market. So a long time ago, they had designed an extractor, and it was kind of designed for university research and this sort of thing. It was like in the late 90s. And this design just kind of sat there. They didn't do anything with it. And every once in a while, somebody would order it and it would pay the electric bills for that month or something. But in 2013, they saw, kind of an opportunity. And what I saw as a result was, as they were making sales, I heard a lot of customer feedback about, issues with the equipment. And I kind of saw that they weren't really ready to budge and make changes to the equipment to improve it. And so I, met my co-founder and talked to him about it, what we could do. And we decided to go off on our own and do this. So I quit my job in 2014 and began designing my own extractor. But, that's my career trajectory. I'll say this, although cannabis wasn't a huge part of my life, every once in a while I'll partake in it. From a political point of view, it really means something to me. I find it kind of be a major human rights crime that we would cage people for accessing this plant. And, I've always felt that way, as a teenager, kind of like in my, punk rock days and all that sort of thing. You kind of have this anarchistic ethic that, people should be able to access these things, and that it's, people don't have a right to cage people, if they're not harming anybody else. So for something, on that end, it means something to me to kind of partake in this. And there are a lot of heroes that have done a lot more to, push the end of prohibition on cannabis. I'm happy to partake in it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty powerful stuff, and it is unfortunate, how things kind of went around in the past. Now we're getting a little more modernized, a little smarter about it. And scientifically, there's a lot of applications for cannabis that we are still just on the cusp of learning about, and extraction plays a big deal on that. Being able to extract portions of it. So what you guys are doing is very important. So I guess for those out there that don't really know about extraction, can you just real in a high level, like simple way, explain the benefits of extraction and why we need extraction in cannabis?
Sure. So the intention of extracting this plant is to kind of get our hands on the concentrated oil, the cannabinoids, and all that content, the terpenes and everything else. It's a way to access it in a concentrated form, and it gives us a way to kind of manipulate it and use it efficaciously, if you will. We can put it into tinctures, or we can make oil that you can smoke with it, and you have to get the oil out of the plant to kind of use it in that way. And so for us, the focus on CO2 is really important here, because other extraction methods, you kind of get a more crude oil, if you will, from the process, where CO2 we're able to target more towards the cannabis and the terpenes and everything without pulling out things that we're not interested in. So it gives us a more refined crude to work with, and it gives us flexibility to kind of design and make new products.
Okay, and that's, I guess, the typical extraction process, right? Is like your first part of when you do the initial extraction into you get a crude substance, but and then from there, you do the winterization, and then you start extracting things. But apparently, you guys have a different process, and we're going to get into this as far as your real-time winterization, basically, where I guess the initial extraction that you get is a higher quality extraction. Is that basically what it is?
Yeah. I mean, that's what CO2 extraction is. I mean, that's a huge benefit of CO2 is it's a very selective. They call it like a selective solvent. It's you can target things based on their molecular weight and their solubility within the solvent. You can change the solvent power of the CO2 to kind of attack certain parts of the composition and leave other parts behind. So you get that benefit. With us, we feel we've taken it to another level of control there. And that's my chromatography background coming into play. Mm-hmm. In chromatography, you have to maintain very precise conditions, and you have to maintain a very stable baseline for managing your injections for analysis and production. And so we've kind of taken some of that ethic where we're kind of going from steampunk equipment to a much more refined process. And you can kind of, even without testing, a priori, we can understand that if you have much more stable equipment, if you have much more stable conditions, you're maintaining much more precision on your pressure control and your temperature control, the quality of your output is going to be much better. And so, we're taking it from that point and, taking a known process and trying to really refine it, to something, much more flexible and reliable at the same time. And so now what we're excited to do is take that extraction process and chop out a huge part of your post-production. So right now what you do is you extract out your crude oil and take it to your post-production lab, winterize it, which takes, good 3 days of effort, using ethanol, lots of ethanol or methanol, freezing it and scraping waxes off and all that. We really are on a quest to find the limits of what you can do with CO2, and what we've been talking about it for years. We brought on Jesse Turner as our R&D director last year, but I've been talking to him for years about this process, and we're finally able to test it and find out that we can take CO2, not only use it for extraction, but we can use it for the winterization process as well. And not only can we do that, we can actually chop off days of effort. We can do it real time in line with the extraction process and actually get a cleaner result from it. So, with a typical winterization, you kind of add into your calculations for production that you're going to lose something like 5 to 10% of your cannabinoids just in that process alone. And we're seeing sub 1% results in our process. So we're getting, you can even see it qualitatively that the waxes look cleaner. They're like a pure white color rather than sort of like a dark green or yellowish color wax. We're just on the qualitative side of things, we know we're getting a much higher quality product, but our testing is also showing the same. So Yeah, we're really excited about this technology. I think it's going to change how people produce this oil, or produce with the oil more accurately.
Oh, that's pretty interesting. So, not only is your system basically eliminating a step, it's like cutting a lot of the actual production time, but you're actually wasting less of the product, and you're getting a higher quality product at the end. Is that essentially what you guys are kind of claiming that the CO2 process could do?
Exactly.
Wow,
What we've actually successfully been able to do is, we've actually been able to extract oil and put it right into vape carts right out of our machine without any post-production. And with a high cannabinoid content. So, in the upper 70s, lower 80s, right out of the machine.
that's incredible. So I guess historically, people have been using CO2 extraction for quite a long time, but a lot of the industry professionals have kind of written off CO2 and thinks that, ethanol is a easier way to do the extraction or a more fitting way. Is that mostly because they don't know what they're doing, or it's too difficult to do it without equipment like what you have? Or what do you think the reasoning behind that idea is?
Oh man, I think it's almost like just gut instinct. Like when you see, if you run an alcohol extraction, it looks like it's just happening faster, and you're just getting your product out, and you're just able to get a bunch of throughput. But the reality of the matter is that you've created a bunch of work on the back end for yourself. You have a lot more alcohol to burn off. You have a lot more solvent to manage. Where CO2 extractions, you're recycling the CO2, so you bring in so much CO2 into your equipment, and you just recycle it the whole process. And the extraction time is slower than an alcohol process, but it's not that much slower. We can do maybe what they're doing in 30 minutes and maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours or something. And we're not getting a lot of garbage out with the oil that we're interested in. And even if you're going through a typical winterization process after CO2, you use a lot less ethanol in that process. So you're using like a tenth of the alcohol as you normally would have to use. So it's a lot less waiting for it to burn off, a lot less equipment for that purpose. So yeah, I think it's just a gut instinct. You see oil come out really quick, it just seems like it's better. I think that in our market, so the CO2 extraction, the technology or the concept of it is decades old, but it's been done on a much larger scale for the most part. Much larger facilities, extractors with 2,000 plus liter vessels, where the cannabis market has kind of scaled it down. You don't need nearly that much throughput to do cannabis extraction, because you can get a lot of use out of THC in a very small quantity. So I think that cannabis has kind of changed the way CO2 extraction has been productized, so to speak. It's scaled it down to a much smaller size, and you have producers that don't have quite the background in the technology. It's easy to kind of say, oh, you just pressurize some CO2 and you flow it and you get an extraction. And that's what the equipment on the market has looked like to me. It's looked like kind of just cobbled together pumps off the shelf and whatever else that does, theoretically or technically speaking, the extraction process. But what we've done is we've designed a machine from the ground up. We designed our own pump to have a much more stable flow profile, a much smoother flow profile. We've automated pressure control on each of our pressure vessels, so that you get a lot more precision. And so now I think we've taken to the next level, where you've gone from the steampunk equipment where it's just kind of chugging along, and you can go into these labs and you hear it chug, chug, chug. Our equipment is virtually silent aside from like the chiller running, and you can watch the pressure stability on our front panel for our software, just kind of dead nuts stable. And those things matter to getting a much better product on the back side.
Got it. Yeah, interesting. So essentially what you're saying is that most of it is kind of just, just optics, or what people feel just from the front end. They see that there's a little more work on the front end, but essentially they're not realizing that it's going to save them time and money and product in the long run if they kind of go through the CO2 process versus like ethanol or something of that nature.
Exactly. Correct? And it's a little bit harder to swallow. The capital cost of CO2 equipment in general is a little bit more per throughput. than alcohol extraction or the other extraction methods, but we think it pays off downstream. You kind of have to look out further from, just the initial capex. You have to look at your OpEx as well, and look at the quality of the product that you're getting. What kind of sales can you make with that oil? That's where CO2 shines.
Yeah, I would imagine also the product itself would have some sort of like ethanol residual, like in the actual product to the consumer. People probably feel better if it's based on carbon dioxide instead of ethanol. Is that kind of
Yeah. That's what's really great about the winterization process for us. It's now we've removed any sort of kind of exposure to those kinds of solvents. Now you have no residuals. You essentially have an organic process through and through.
What about safety in the production as well, right? Because everything else is flammable, but CO2 is not. So I'm assuming that would be a big plus side on the production side.
Yeah, I always tell people, I don't have a great mug here, but I'd rather keep this one than have it blown off. CO2 is inert, and I don't have that risk. It's a high pressure process, but the safety factors that are built into that equipment is, it's intrinsically safe. We have multiple levels of safety. The pressure vessels are well overrated for the pressure conditions that we run and everything. So I think it's a much safer process.
Gotcha. This industry, historically has kind of been, a lot of people, it's almost like an art. There's people that have their way of doing extraction, but it seems just like in any like change in technology that the technology side is going to take over on the user ability side. So do you think your process and your machinery makes it so more the layman can kind of produce results that someone would be more of a so-called expert or artist in the craft? Do you see that kind of going that direction?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that in addition to your point there, I think when you have the right tools, you can actually take your art even further. If you have the right paintbrush, you can paint a better painting. I don't, for lack of a better analogy, but we think that having the right tool is what gives you the advantage on the artistic side, and we don't want to like downplay that. I think that's really important too. I think people are actually having fun producing this oil. I think they're actually having fun coming up with new products, and we can see it all the time on social media and everything else. That people they're constantly trying to work up a new kind of oil, or what have you. What gives them that ability is to have a much more technically advanced machine to work with. Something that gives you a lot more flexibility with your methodologies and your approaches to the extraction. So I think it's better just to move this technology forward.
Yeah. So funny point. So I've heard that you've been called the Steve Jobs of extraction. As I looked at your product, I see the correlation, just because you guys focus a lot more than most other of the competitors or other companies out there on the user experience and a way to actually make it a little more fluid, like the entire process. I guess expand on that, on the usability portion of your product.
Sure. I've never heard that, but that's very kind. But no, the equipment, that's the whole point, is that you can get in and produce without having to worry. So, things like the configuration of our equipment allows you to collect while the machine's operating. So if you're developing a method, you benefit from being able to kind of check your oil as the machine's running, for example. And this is just an example of what we're talking about. And a lot of equipment, you have to stop the operation, kind of pull off the collection cup and like find a way to like take samples of the oil. But you can come up to our machine at any point and take collections and find out how the extraction process is going along. And without getting into the nitty gritty of it, this is actually really important. They're extraction curves that we're concerned about as far as like determining what your total runtime should be with a particular product, and then finding out at what rate your different cannabinoids pull out of the plant. So they all have different extraction curves. And so be able to go and collect that oil, get it analyzed, and understand like how your extraction process looks with a particular strain that you're extracting. is one way that we would say that we're paying attention to the user experience. In addition, being able to simply just enter a recipe and recall it and giving you the density feedback of your recipe conditions for each of the vessels, which is really important. We use it all the time. When we're designing our recipes, as you enter your parameters, the recipe is giving you back what the density of the CO2 density of those conditions is. So, if you're trying to get THC out of your plant, and we know at about 0.79, 0.8 grams per milliliter density, that's where that cannabinoid pulls out without going too high of a density that would pull out things like chlorophyll. It gives us control and a way to intelligently design our methodologies without shooting blind. So, and just aside from that, we've really focused on just the reliability of our equipment. Not only do we want the thing to be technologically advanced, but the thing has to be reliable. And we've gone as far as we thought we were going to be putting out service plans for our equipment, but as we put more machines out in the market, we found that there's just no point to it. We actually have a really simple maintenance process that we advise on, checking filters and that sort of thing. Kind of liken it to the automobile. If you think about like when automobiles first came out, they're clunkers. You had to do all kinds of maintenance, constantly changing belts or whatever you had to do to keep them running. But now they're refined pieces of equipment or refined machines where all you have to do is change the oil and change the oil filter. Those things keep running. That's why we're kind of looking at our equipment from that side of the user experience, is that you want to be able to just keep running with simple maintenance. So yeah, I think that's how we, there's some ways we've addressed that.
Okay. And you've been offering, extraction machines, but the real-time winterization, what's the timeline looking at on that to be able to be presented to the public?
Yeah. Well, we've been validating that for quite some time now. And now we're in the productization phase of the project. And we're looking at about end of Q2, beginning of Q3 for release. So we're getting really close. We're going to be doing a little bit more. We've done the validation testing, and we know the process is repeatable and works really well. But we want to make sure we do, when we release the product to our customers, that we give them a methodology that works for their processes to start with. We anticipate lots of experimenting and finding out new approaches to this technology, but we want to give something that works really reliably to start with. So that's what we're focusing on now, is making sure we have like a really nice methodology. These are the conditions that we want to run to get the most efficiency out of your extraction process.
Now, do you guys have any rough calculation as far as, so besides the point that you have a higher quality product as an end result, you are going to be wasting less product. You are also going to cut down on the production time. Do you kind of have numbers on how much like money they can, save essentially by using the process of real-time winterization versus, the standard?
Yeah. This is anecdotal. We recently did some on-site testing with a customer. And when they saw the results, they kind of just quickly did math in their head, and they said, man, this thing will save us $120,000 a year, with just the savings and lost cannabinoid potential there. So, when you're stacking that up, that means a lot. But additionally, the CapEx expense, the way we looked at the pricing of the equipment and everything was to kind of understand what the CapEx expense for a standard winterization process. And we referenced like good quality science equipment. We didn't reference like the kind of like lower quality, cheap market stuff. We referenced our pricing off of like, hey, I'm buying good quality equipment. This is what I'm going to put in my lab. And that comes out to around $150,000 or so for kind of the anticipated throughput of the equipment. And so we're releasing ours at about $130,000, and we think that's a really nice sell for, the idea of eliminating the OpEx expense of like less technicians having to deal with this, less production time, and the quality improvement, we think it's a deal. We think it's a real benefit. So that's kind of what we're looking at for a release, release price.
Sure. So, I mean, at that price point, obviously, it's not for hobbyists. So, who would be your target demographic? Who would you think would benefit the most from your products?
Sure. I think our target, we want to sell to anybody. Obviously, anybody wants to buy our equipment, we'll be more than happy to sell it to you. But our target market is the boutique kind of craft cannabis market, and we kind of liken our equipment to the microbrew industry. We think that's going to be the most important part of this market as it matures. There obviously will be high throughput players that are just kind of churning out a bunch of oil and getting it, product on the shelf. But I think there are going to be a lot of people, especially as the market matures, that are really interested in unique, high quality product that really kind of respects the essence of the plant itself. And that's where our equipment shines the most. It's scaled correctly to these smaller producers that are really interested in putting out something unique, akin to the microbrew market.
That makes sense. If somebody wanted to get started, what's the easiest way to get started with your company?
Give us a call. Actually, you can go on our website, greenmillsupercritical.com. Our phone number's at the top, and I actually don't have it memorized off the top of my head. I'm sorry. It's the cell phone world.
Well, we'll put it in a link. We'll put it in a link for sure.
Awesome. Thank you. But if you want to get the process going, reach out to Michelle Jun at her email is michelle@greenmillsupercritical.com. And she'll guide you through the sales process.
That sounds great. Before we go, now that you're on kind of the cutting edge of like the future of cannabis and how products are being produced, in your mind and what you see, what do you think's the next kind of trend in cannabis as far as in your space? What's next?
Well, I think aside from the stuff we're excited about on the kind of just unique productization point of view for everybody, being able to develop unique products. I think people are going to be really looking at their bottom line now, really kind of doing the numbers. And, I think there, you had the green rush, and you had a lot of people just kind of getting into business because they could and didn't even have business plans, and that sort of, that just the basics when you start a business, when you do your analysis. What we're seeing now is, and we're getting phone calls that indicate this all the time now, that people are really being thoughtful about the metrics that they have to kind of apply to their production process, and what do I have to really account for? And so efficiency is going to be really key moving forward. I think just aside from the exciting stuff, people need to make money. This is a commodity, and if you're going to run a business, you want to understand it, and you want to be able to have reliable numbers to work with. And so that's what we think is really important about our equipment too.
Yeah, just like in any new emerging market, everybody just kind of went out there and just got what they needed to get the job done. Right. Now it's the time to take a look at what you got and see if it could be done better.
Exactly.
And I think you guys have done a good job at, looking at what's out there and making it better. So
I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show. It was a pleasure for having you.
Thanks for having me.
And best of luck to your RealTime Winterization. We'll keep everybody up to date on that release, and we look forward to it.
Great, thank you so much. Talk to you.
All right, thanks.
Bye.
All right. Once again, I want to thank Jeremy Diehl with Green Mill Supercritical for coming on to the show today. And for all your cannabis news and for other podcasts like this one, visit us at www.trichomes.com, or you could check us out on the TRICHOMES community app. To reach out to the show, email us at techandcannabis@trichomes.com. I'm Jason Kitamura. Thank you for joining us today.